yeah, we will we can ask questions and get up to speed. But we'll start the recording, and then I'll probably just have James take it away because you have been, I think, leading the CSD discussions. And so let me just get the recording done. Okay.
Recording in progress.
There we go.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. Apologies if there's any background noise here. I'm in the office, as I mentioned before, so we have a few other staff here on their own calls, but we'll try and keep it like a usual meeting. So just to catch you all up to speed, and apologies if you can't hear me. Just to catch you all up to speed, we're sort of in the middle right now of our CSD update with this group. This is sort of an ongoing iterative draft. Once we get it to a point where this group is comfortable with what's proposed, we take this draft and we go through sort of our more formal reviews and checks internally with our department, as well as other departments, and definitely most importantly, management and county council, so our county lawyers, to make sure that, because this is a piece of code that goes into local law, we want to make sure that it complements and works with any existing regulations, both at the state and local level, because I think, as we mentioned in the meeting before, the CSD can't circumvent any existing laws. It's really just to provide extra standards when it's feasible to do so. So that's a really big part of the CSD checks that we need to do. But I'll start off by sharing my screen, and then we can maybe just go over some of the comments that I received from the group prior, and then from there I think we've left off on page 9, and so we can continue really with commercial area standards. That's going to be really the bulk of the CSD, is how can the CSD help create spaces along Colima or other commercial properties that are improved based off of what the community has mentioned, and better than the existing conditions now. So, because we've heard a lot of feedback from the community about how they wish to see Colima Boulevard, or Colima Road, sorry, improved.
James?
Yeah.
Before we look at the CSD, the RHCCC board was wondering, is it possible to present an update of what has been happening the last year at one of our meetings, so that we could get an idea of when we ask for comments, so the community isn't caught off guard, and just to let them know this is what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, Neil, did you want to?
Yeah, sure, we can do that. So Linda, let us know how we can coordinate a date and time that we can come and present an update to the work that we're doing with the area plan. It'll be similar to the meeting that you attended, the presentation that we provided on the availability of the draft elements and the draft community chapters that we've made available to the public since April. We can also provide an update since then that the mobility action plan has been completed, and what to expect next.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. So then, because you're going to solicit comments from the public,
yes,
once you're ready with the general plan and also with the CSD. So this is sort of just to get the community thinking about it and get themselves educated about the process. Okay, great.
Yes, definitely. Yep, we can do that. All right.
Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, and additionally, if Carrie will post the Zoom link, as you guys put out on the RHCC website, that will give them, again, they'll have everything that's in this meeting and previously to go over before you present it at the RHCC and have a broader audience. Just to comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That sounds great. All right. I'm working off of a little bit of a smaller screen here, and so it always tends to freeze right when you need it most. Just a few moments here. Can people see my screen right now, or I'm not too sure?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, awesome.
And we can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's always this little technical here. All right, so I'm just gonna zoom out. I know this is like probably really too hard to read right now, but I'm just gonna zoom out just to go through the comments, and then we can go line by line. Let's see here. Okay, so as we discussed at the previous meeting, so like we mentioned at a I'm just trying to find the Zoom button here. The purpose statement will be updated to better match the proposed standards that are going to be in the updated CSD. And the group kind of came to a consensus at the last meeting that DRP will take a first kind of stab at the updated draft of the purpose statement. And that we tend to do that kind of at the end of the CS, like once we go through all of the CSD standards. And the reason why we do that sort of at the end is to make sure that we are reflective of everything that's proposed in the new code. I think as we've been working on this, there's been new topics that have come up from the group, and it's been great to sort of incorporate that along the way. And then then we can sort of come back to the purpose statement and provide that an update. It's the purpose statement is really a summary intended for the public and also our planners too, to have a better idea of what the specific kind of set of standards is. It's real. The actual teeth of the CSD really come into the standard. So the purpose statement it's important, but ultimately a sort of a summary piece of the CSD. Okay, so let's see here. And so this is the same draft that's been sent out to the group. We'll send out a version of this again at the end of this meeting too, if there's any additional comments. But what I did is I received a few drafts from folks with their proposed comments and updates, and then I incorporated into this draft so we can just see everything in line. So let's see here. So the first comment, and this is related to significant ridge lines, and this is just a comment from Linda, just asking if there's a variance is allowed for the significant ridgeline rules. The significant ridgeline rules essentially entails, you establish your significant ridgelines map. That's an adopted map with the area plan. So the ridgelines are very specific, and it sets a minimum 50 by 50 horizontal vertical distance that a structure would have to be from that significant ridgeline. This is all intended to help with protecting hillsides and protecting ridgelines. That's been like the number one feedback we've gotten from this group. Definitely is protect the hillsides. So there's two things with this one. Yes, a variance is with the standard language of significant ridgelines. Really, with any of these standards, a variance is always can always be allowed. It's essentially the same as like a plan amendment or a zoning amendment. Essentially, what this allows is at any time a property owner can submit a request to the county in the form of an application to go enter into a discretionary process to see if they can circumvent or at least adapt the standards to best fit their project. What that does not mean is that it's not a get out of all the standards card. It's an extremely extensive, time-consuming, and ultimately discretionary process. So this just allows the applicant to propose variance. It does not mean that they're granted the variance. It does not mean that the county would accept the variance, and all of this is subject to also, community, like a variance is, subject to community engagement. They would have to, hold, public meetings and public notification of such. So this is really good. All of the standards in a CSD can be an applicant, any applicant, whether a property owner or a developer, is always allowed to apply for variance. It does not mean that they get the variance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, the burden of proof to actually meet the variance findings is just very high. So just to kind of reiterate what James was saying, that there is findings that has to be made, and the burden of proof that has to be met, the bar is high.
Yeah. And the second kind of part of this is, and this is just kind of an FYI to
just kind of tagging on. In mountainous areas with similar things, have any variances been allowed?
You've worked in the Santa Monica Mountains. I don't know if you've seen any of that.
I'm trying to think. I can't think of an example of a variance from a significant ridgeline, or just variances in general. Variances in general, it's just very rare for a variance to be filed and for variances to be granted. It is a relief mechanism that's provided, but if people file a lot of variances, that means that the code that we have just doesn't work, right? It's not. If people are filing for relief from the standards and regulations, then it just means that the code is not working. So again, variances are very rare in terms of both, applications for variances, for a variance, and granting of a variance. I can't think of a specific example right now. I think that I might have worked on just one, but I can't remember the details of that. I think there's a hardship that was involved with that, but I can't remember the details.
Yeah, you have to essentially prove that you can't build under the guidelines. Like, for whatever reason, maybe if the property was so shallow or so small that it couldn't meet the minimum 50 distance and 50 height, because it has to meet both. That would be maybe a burden of proof for a variance, but it would still have to be located as much away as possible. So it is a very high burden of proof, and it's a very, like we said, a very rare a very rare sort of approval of such a permit. They really have to do a lot of due diligence to prove that it is not buildable in many cases, otherwise, specifically with the ridgeline issue, because it is pretty clear how the buffers are very clear. So yeah, I hope that helps clarify.
This, and just to add to that too, like the language that's being proposed here is the exact, same language for the most part that's located in the Santa Monica Mountains area, which I think is probably one of the most heavily regulated areas in the county because of its biodiversity. So definitely this is sort of like the highest kind of bar of standards to be placed in a CSD like this. So it really is, there's certainly a lot more protection that's granted right now, because there's no significant ridgelines mapped in Rowland Heights right now. The other kind of part of this, and this is more just an FYI, and there'll be other steps in this too, is the area plan will also include an area-wide standards district. So I think in the past when we showed you like this big map of East St. Gabriel Valley, stretching from Rowland Heights and Hacienda Heights, but all the way up to Claremont, all the way up to Sousa, there's going to be an area-wide standards. And as part of that, there's also going to be significant ridgeline protections. So right now, Adrine is going through the exercise of surgically fine-tuning, like mapping the significant ridgelines themselves based off of, mapping data that we have. It's a pretty arduous process, and so there'll be updates, in another meeting about that, but that's being done for the whole planning area. So not just Rowland Heights, but for, South Diamond Bar across the 57 freeway. It's currently undeveloped, and I'm sure you all heard, maybe in past years about, different projects being proposed there and things like that. Really what we're trying to do is have significant ridge lines mapped for the whole area where it's pertinent to do so. And then to have this significant ridge lines language, this is exactly what you're seeing here, in the area-wide standards. Now, in the case where it's in the area-wide standards, we don't want a case where the local Rowland Heights standards and the area-wide standards conflict. So in this case, what we're showing you will be applicable to Rowland Heights fully, and there'll be no change in how this is applied or enforced. The only difference is that this will likely be pulled out of this CSD into the area-wide. But what we'll make sure that we'll do is that at every point with the CSD, when we have a draft of the area-wide standards, we will share that with this group just in the same way that we're sharing the CSD. The last, we want to make sure that you all are on the same page as far as, this is not, this isn't like taking away this standard from Rowland Heights or this proposed standard. In fact, we're really trying to apply this across the board to really all of the hillsides, not just in Rowland Heights, but to the east in the Diamond Bar area that's unincorporated. Hacienda Heights also has mapped significant ridge lines, so that would help them as well. And then also in Angeles National Forest to the north, there's some unincorporated enclaves that we can see if we can help protect that too. So that's just an FYI that in a future draft, if you don't see this, we'll make note that it's being moved to the area-wide standard, but it doesn't change the level of enforcement or the applicability to Rowland Heights in any way.
Okay, so you may be expanding ours to area-wide, but what happened, will you also notify us if it's just being removed?
Yeah, so
it's not being removed. It's just being pulled out of this, a community CSD, and it's being made applied to the rest of the community. So you can kind of think of it as the effort that we're going through right now will actually benefit the whole region when it comes to the protection of the significant ridgelines.
And with the adoption of the East Sahara Valley Area Plan, we will have a significant ridgeline map that gets adopted. And so that will officially be a part of the regulatory mechanism, and that gets enforced through the significant ridgeline part of the ordinance. So that will be mapped, it will be adopted as a map, and it will be in our GIS system as we have for the Santa Monica Mountains. So when a project comes in, the minute you see the property, you see if there's a significant ridgeline on it, and that's mapped, and that immediately triggers the application of the ordinance for the area wide for all of these for that property to have that ridgeline. So those go in tandem, and they'll be hand in hand, and they will be adopted as part of the plan.
So that was just an FYI, and we'll update this group every step of the way with that. But like me and Adrine mentioned, no change in the enforcement or how it's permitted. It's really just on our side. It's more like an administrative thing. It doesn't really change the intent there. Okay, so this next question, or this series of questions, are related to these proposed off-site and shared parking standards. Essentially, the short of this is that parking requirements can be met in certain cases if there's like a full CUP. If there's an owner of property that's proposed for development, they can have, as long as another property is within 500 feet of that property, they can satisfy the parking agreement with that property, as long as the owners of such enter into a recorded agreement that's reported onto the covenant, or it's a covenant on the property, and it's like very clear with the standards that they would have to meet on that. So it's extraordinarily hard to circumvent that agreement if it's on the property. But how this would work is, let's say there's a shopping center that's underutilized, or half of it's closed, or there's a underutilized church property. Potentially one property could satisfy their parking requirements by having some of their spots 500 it has to be within 500 feet with the recorded covenant on the property. It's all required a CUP, so it's a really high bar for any developer or property owner to meet. In fact, from a meeting yesterday, it's probably likely that because this is CUP related, the odds of people actually entering these agreements might be pretty low. But it's always great to provide options to applicants. The more options that an applicant has, the better on the ground outcomes that you'll generally see. And just to clarify here, that like 500 feet is 0.1 miles, so it's about it's less than half of a quarter mile. I measured a few of the shopping centers along Colima, and it's about, it's a little less than the length between the edge of the parking lot and the front door of like a shopping center, if that makes sense. So it's pretty limited. But the question here was from Teri's, just that could be a burden for people with disabilities. Totally understandable there. And we got some clarification yesterday that none of this precludes any sort of meeting of any ADA regulations that can include on-site ADA parking stalls that are still required. And one thing to note here, and this will be kind of a running theme for the rest of the CSD too, there's been a couple comments and kind of existing language in here that recommends following ADA regulations. Obviously, that's a really important thing. The ADA regulations and improving accessibility is great for the community. In this context here, we've been advised by other planners to sort of limit references to specific ADA rules. And the reason for that is that, let's say that ADA rules in the future at the federal level or even at the state level become more stringent, or there's more requirements there. We wouldn't want a case where our CSD says something that's less, or that's more lenient than the actual law. So we want to make sure that's a really important part of the CSD, is that because it's also law, it needs to fit within this ecosystem of all the other laws. And so just because there's no mention, or there may not be mention of specific ADA rules that apply, doesn't mean that it's not implicit to them meeting the requirements of development. We also, were reminded that Public Works is the primary, when the project goes through all their permit checks and it goes to Public Works, that department is the primary lead when it comes to making sure that projects meet ADA requirements. Because they don't actively use Title 22, and they use different parts of the code to look at the applications, it's not necessarily feasible to have them check another part of the code that they're not, tasked with. So that, in that sense, all that to say that in case you don't see as many ADA references, doesn't mean that it's not as applicable as it was before. Looks like Henry, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thanks. I kind of wonder how this actually would work if the ADA travel distance at the federal level is 200 feet, and if you push it all the way to the other side, outside of the adjacent property, then in a sense you have to put more ADA closer to the entrance of the facility or market or churches or whatever. Then I don't know. This is a kind of a interim situation, I guess. It's very, to me, it's not really workable.
Right. So I guess
if you meet 200 feet, then you gotta add more ADA parking near the front entrance or the main accessibility entrance. So the signing for this parking, I don't know. I think maybe we should have a clause to say this is only working for larger sites. Let's say for parking lots bigger than 100 cars. And there are so many small lots, commercial lots in Rowland Heights, and I don't know how this is going to work at all.
So I guess just to clarify, I don't think I did a very good job of explaining it. So all that to say, or what I was saying earlier, is that let's say an applicant proposes some of their parking to be moved 500 feet away at the max, they'd still have to provide on site any of the ADA rules that apply. So they could move maybe 10 spots out of their property or onto let's say just an adjacent property. And that's really what this is for. It may not, max 500 feet, but for the most part, this is a tool to provide connections between adjacent, like let's say the parking lot on the next property over. They would still have to provide those ADA spots on the property that the application is for. So all that to say that the ADA rules are not precluded because of this by any means, and that Public Works will apply those rules in their review.
Right. So, and ADA is a building and safety issue, so it's not something that any developer or anyone can override. It is part of the building and safety check, and Public Works will check for that. And so if it's required to be near the entrance, the number of spaces that ADA compliant spaces, parking spaces that has to be provided near an entrance, that has to be met. This is just providing for those instances where they can provide off-site or shared parking. Shared parking, especially if there's an opportunity for shared parking, which could reduce the number of these, surface parking lots we see, then this is just providing an opportunity for somebody to apply for this. But it's not necessarily saying, overriding any ADA requirements. Again, it's building and safety issue that Public Works checks for.
But is this like an ongoing on a regular basis, or is it going to be per occasion or event, or how do you check?
It'd be tied to a parking permit, and what we learned yesterday is likely a CUP level review. So to your point, Henry, this would probably be only for projects that would require a CUP. So we're talking major projects. And if anything, based off of what I was learning yesterday, it's unlikely that this would apply to too many projects in Rowland Heights, and it's really just because there's a lot of open flat top along a lot of properties in Rowland Heights that could probably just be used for parking anyway. Yeah, it's always good to provide more options to applicants, but this would help in very specific circumstances. And there's, again, with the CUP review, there's a high barrier of investigations and burden of proof that the applicant would need to meet. Okay, and then just one thing related to parking, one more thing, just a question on whether or not these agreements can be made in perpetuity. I think it's important to be able to provide that flexibility for, if you say that these, a parking agreement must be made in perpetuity, that essentially locks the other properties that has the parking in time. So the parking agreement is locked in time with the covenant. But let's say that there's a church use that's underutilized, so for 5 or 10 years, people can park there while we're making another parking garage on this other property over here. And we want our next phase is that we would like to, reinvigorate this underutilized church property and make it into a nicer church. And we're gonna have less parking spots here, so we're gonna move them over there. So all that to say that while the parking agreements are solidly tied to a recorded covenant, it's also important that we allow flexibility so that in cases where you want properties to be more dynamic and you don't want necessarily the same use on a property for 50, 60 years, even if it outlasts the needs of the community, or even if it doesn't meet the needs of the community anymore, you'd want to have that flexibility to go about it that way. But none of that would impact, or the flexibility doesn't impact the actual parking requirements that they would need to meet at that time. Okay, so this is, and I'm just going through these comments just because this group has already had an opportunity to review these standards, and we'll send, we can provide the link again so people can add additional comments if they wish. And but this is just a good way to kind of go over some of the hits that we've had in the past here. So Teri's comment is, can we make, so this is related to design elements like pergolas or trellises, benches, outdoor seating, bike racks. These are all things that for C zones or for commercial or mixed use zones along Colima. If there's new proposed renovation, but maybe not a complete new structure. Let's say it's just okay, we're rehabbing this old grocery store into a nice into a nicer grocery store. We're adding a new facade. We're doing all this kind of stuff. And so in cases where more than 50% of the existing exterior walls are cumulatively removed, demolished, or rebuilt, this code says that the entire project shall conform to the following standards. And so really it's like that 50% point is when the whole thing is subject to the new standards. So if let's say you're only working on 2 of the walls, then you can be subject to the rules that you had at the beginning, or that are currently in place. More than 50% of the walls are affected, demolished or rebuilt. The whole new code applies. So the comment was related to, can we make the 50% more stringent? Can we make it 49% or less? Can we have the code act more quicker? Can we even if it's small changes, can we have the whole new thing apply? And this is just kind of speaking from kind of past experience working on CSDs, especially ones that the community really wanted some really strong standards and really restrictive standards so to best fit kind of the desired outcomes there. It does have a tendency to backfire a little bit, and there's some very real-world examples of this. So restrictive standards that have really low thresholds, low thresholds to meet for high-cost improvements, like let's say you have to completely redesign your project because you're renovating the outer walls, that can cause a property owner to delay those renovations entirely. So let's say I was the owner of an aging shopping center along Colima. The community wants that to be updated and revitalized, but I'm looking at this code and I'm like, well, I can add in new facade. I was thinking about really making this maybe getting Whole Foods or Sprouts or something, a really big change to this existing shopping center. But I'm looking at this code and I don't know, it seems like it can be really expensive to upgrade as opposed to like a fresh coat of paint that I was thinking of. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to kind of let this property sit. I'm still making money because it's still a grocery store, but I'm not going to go through the hassle to sort of update everything based off of just my desire to maybe repaint the outside or something like that, or update some walls. And their future intention may be just, okay, I'm just going to let this structure sort of continue to exist until maybe it makes sense for me to just raise the structure and build something new. This is really intended to allow for some kind of intermediate impact via the code. So the 50% renovation standard is really intended to extract some of that community benefit in cases where those renovations are being made. And then another part with this too, these are all have to be implemented by real, planners, people, and they have to be enforced by enforcement. So that means that the code has to be pretty objective, and it's pretty difficult to objectively determine, okay, what's 49% of the project, as opposed to with 50% you can count the whole walls as units, that kind of thing. Teri, you have your hand raised?
Is Teri or
I think Teri has her hand raised.
Mute. Okay. I brought this up because I think it would discourage really major renovations and you just get half-hearted ones, which really isn't what we want.
Mm-hmm. I guess so.
Actually, Teri, it's exactly what you wanted to prevent, which is we're dealing with a lot of existing development, and the question is we want to make sure that these set of standards that are really about building design, that they also apply to existing structures. So not just when some entire building is torn down and rebuilt, with this apply, but it would apply to existing structures. But we've had to balance that against at what point should these standards apply. If it's at 25%, then you know what, somebody may decide that, you know what, it's not cost effective. If they're just making a minor change to their building facade, and that would trigger a upgrade to the entire building. So, so that's why it's split at 50-50. And it is something that, we do at, in other CSDs too. So if you look at the La Crescenta CSD, this is the trigger for the renovation to the entire building, or having these standards applied to an existing building.
And as a real world example too, in addition to La Crescenta, there's another code in East Los Angeles that has pretty stringent, very ambitious, well-meaning standards, perhaps so ambitious that they haven't really been implemented at all. And that's really because a lot of those property owners there they still see money coming in from the existing uses they have on the property, and they're not going to be incentivized to redo their property if the future standards are really ambitious and potentially onerous and expensive. It's not to say that that's not our desired outcome. It is. We have to think of ways to have intermediary or iterative improvements, and that's kind of where this building-based design standard comes in, where it's like any exterior building modification, except for signage, shall include at least 2 of the following design elements on at least one of those facades. So let's say, back to the grocery store example, they actually do want to just repaint the outside of their grocery store, and they don't want to go through all of the entire code. They could at least apply some outdoor pedestrian improvement infrastructure like benches or a trellis or pergola. And the reason why it's at that level is that these are relatively inexpensive. We're talking in maybe a few $100, maybe, like around no more than, $1,000 and some change there. To an applicant or a property owner, that's sort of kind of throw away money in the grand scheme of their renovation. Whereas, completely, moving a structure or completely changing how it looks or cutting off the top, it can be it's owners to a point where they may not even make those changes at all. Okay. Let's see here, just going to do this once. And we're likely going to update these photos so that they best fit with the desired outcomes. I know, Henri, you sent some great photos of Brea, and I'm just trying to find some, if this group has good photos, maybe locally, where you see like trellis or pergola. It doesn't have to, if it's not in Rowland Heights, if it's in like an adjacent city or a place that you really like, we can use that too. This is really just for planners to show the applicant, like, okay, this is what we mean when we say trellis or pergola. Yeah, Teri.
Question. If they just want to do something minor like paint, could we require them to put on a pergola or something, or they're just going to go paint?
No, that's exactly why that's exactly what this section is focused on. So any exterior, this is kind of, we're at this point where we're buckle up, folks, because we're going to go line by line here. Any exterior building modification, except for signage. So we're not talking. Well, the signage section is later. That can be a pretty expensive process. Also, if the tenant's not changing, then it doesn't make sense necessarily to update signage. So any exterior building modification except for signage shall include at least 2 of the following design elements on at least one facade. So not just a trellis or pergola, but they also have to apply one of the other things in the menu. That can be benches, and they need to provide burden of proof is on the applicant. So they need to provide proof that they do install and actually implement this in their plans. Could be benches, and Teri, I did know that you said you want to make sure they have like a backrest on them, so we can add that language that says that it has to be a bench with a backrest. It could also include bicycle racks as well. And then outdoor seating, and that outdoor seating, they would need to prove, and enforcement can certainly prove if that outdoor seating is kept out there too. For the most part, this is kind of to help like, restaurants, and this is done this code was from, pre-COVID times. I think now it's kind of the norm to have outdoor seating.
Yeah, but I think, James, we need to take another look because we need to look at the applicability. So the applicability and then where do standards, if it falls under that applicability, then I think we'd have to take another look at the way the language is written. So if there are certain things that we want to make sure is triggered off of even a painting of facade, and that painting of facade would not necessarily be this cumulatively remove, demolish, or rebuild, then I think we'd have to take a look at that. Yeah, we'll take another look, Teri, to make sure that if this is not left nested under certain things that we want to make sure small things that could be done is not nested under this applicability, and it can be triggered by something like, I don't know, any modification to an existing exterior. Okay.
And I think that's the case now. It's just that is an issue that we have with like this kind of, it's an unformatted draft, so it's hard to see like the hierarchy of it. So that's definitely something we'll need to check.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So let's just go through here.
Yard setbacks?
Yard setbacks. Are you for the commercial areas?
Yeah, because you're taking a lot of the frontage and a whole lot of it is now being devoted for other things than landscaping. It's just right where you were.
Right here. Yeah. So,
It's
well,
the
I
same
guess.
section you were at. You just like
Oh,
flipped over it.
Sorry about that.
It's his mouse.
Yes, or I'm on the small screen today. So, yeah, so
The yard setbacks.
right.
Say up to, okay, you only have 15% of the net area is for landscaping. And of that, it's written that 50% of the 15% could be for furniture and everything else. So you only have 15%, and of that, half of it you'd lose because it would be outdoor dining, so you'd basically be losing half of your 15%. Can we still get some additional greenery in there?
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
I threw in 25%, but it just seems like you don't have much landscaping anyway if it's only 15%, and if you're losing half of that.
Yeah. So this is I guess it's important too to like kind of have to clarify that there's like the setback requirements or how far a structure needs to be from the right of way, and then there's the landscaping requirements and what percentage of that setback area has to be landscaped. So we're I think there's some pretty strong existing language here. Not in this yard setback, but in the landscaping section, I think that was brought in here. I'll have to find that, but that has like a minimum requirement of landscaping on the property. So that includes like in the parking areas, if it's over X amount of stalls, you need to have trees in the parking lot as part of your parking lot design. So yeah, but you're right though. So this changed. So 25% of that required 15% of the net area. The proposal here is that you could use that for those pedestrian circulation areas. And the intent of that, and we can go back to the drawing board and edit this. The intent of that is that it's great to have landscaped areas, but if you have a landscaped area that the public can't walk in or enjoy, if it's just something to look at, then that doesn't necessarily create that walkable environment that this community has been like that, or that this community, this group has kind of been proposing to us of making the Kalima a more walkable corridor. Not to say that we couldn't increase the landscaping requirements. I think that's totally possible. We need to make some, make sure that there's allowed you to use native plantings and drought tolerant landscaping, because we don't want to necessarily see too much more lawn on these commercial places or things that are really water intensive. But certainly we can take a look at that. Really, the 25% of 15% is about 4% of the total project area. Really, a lot of these parcels, the vast majority of the space, in fact, I think most of the space is just the parking lot, just the blacktop. So this is really just adding additional circulation areas within the landscape area to provide some of that refuge. If you have it at 50%, that would mean that these pedestrian circulation areas would apply to about 8% of the total project area. So we're really talking about like less than 1/10 of the total project size. So a lot of this, at the end of the day, is kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of space that's just completely uncovered with any landscaping. But yeah, we can definitely see if we can increase the required landscaping in these businesses and make it so that I think that there is an importance of adding in those pedestrian circulation areas. Another thing to think about too is that there are state laws that impact how ambitious the landscaping requirements can be without taking that from somewhere else of the proposed property. So there's rules that you can't have objective standards that limit limit the size or intensity of development that was already allowed for, I think for the legislation is like 2018. So, if let's say you have a landscaping requirement, like we want 50 feet of the front landscaping of a parcel to just be landscaping and nothing else, that could raise red flags with an applicant and perhaps could potentially be litigated against, saying this landscaping requirement is preventing me from proposing development or getting my development accepted based off of the intensities allowed even before the CSD went into play. Like we're talking, 5 years ago or so. So yeah, we can definitely take a look at this. I mean, also too, if this is not appreciated by the group, or there's still concerns here, we can just remove it. There's still the setback requirements and there's still the landscaping requirements. If you don't want the pedestrian circulation areas or the outdoor furniture to, if you want that to be a separate requirement from the landscaping requirement, yeah, we can just take it out.
I also just wanted to add that for any kind of major renovation of like shopping centers and stuff with the surface parking, the county has under a separate ordinance for countywide, the tree canopy. So they have to provide trees in the parking lot area when they do a major renovation. So I can't remember offhand what the trigger is, but that's in the countywide ordinance. So that's also something else that would lead to greening in areas that when they renovate that, they would just less now. So I think that.
Henri has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think is there. I thought the OCSD. I don't remember exactly now. It has some requirement about maintenance of the landscape. If you have landscape, you need to be continuously in the shape to maintain it, not just letting it die off.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not, it's something that we will add in to the CSD. So maintain in good condition where We'll write in the maintenance of landscaping into the CSD. Mm-hmm. We can borrow language from conditions that we write to a project, which requires something similar. So yeah, Henri, we'll make sure that we do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also, now that we're talking about the exterior, one of the elements, I don't know how we could make it improve from the existing condition, is the paint. Paint is the easiest way to improve the outlook for property owners, but yet paint selection sometimes is just awful. And is there a way to say the paint has to be comparable or compatible?
So
the color wheel of every company that creates paint has a color wheel, and the color wheel will suggest that you don't put opposite side of the wheel, or you put something more complementary side. Or paint selection is so difficult to enforce, I suppose.
That's part of
exactly
it.
Right.
Yeah,
you're exactly right.
And I appreciate Henri for the feedback, because I think you are you are right in that the it's really sometimes the little ingredients that make the biggest changes to development. And I think that there's a lot of properties, along Colima that could use a fresh coat of paint. And I think that alone could really elevate those spaces. So there's one that it's hard to enforce is definitely one. And the last thing you'd want is a policy that's hard to enforce, because then you go through all this work and then nothing's ever done with it. The other part is that the state is very clear that any new development standards have to be objective. It either fits it or it doesn't. There's no CSD that I can think of that has a specific color hex codes of what the paint has to meet. And even if there was, I think each of the brands have slightly different shades. So it gets back to the enforcement part. The other, I guess, as another example, we've had CSDs in the past that say that everything should be in earth tone colors. That even was controversial, because for every requirement you have, an applicant be like, well, I think this color is an earth tone color, and then now you're kind of like in this catch-22 where it's just like, well, it's just who. So and even having a definition of what an earth tone color is pretty much like that. Those standards have been removed in other CSDs in the past, so I don't think that that's feasible. Yeah,
it's difficult. Like, there was an example I can remember where we got this inquiry about, okay, what do we do with this? Because it was earth tone colors, and then somebody wanted to use a brick color, but then it was like that color was so bright and bright that it almost verged on being red, but it was still considered, maybe could have been considered earth tone. And so we run into these issues. So it's really hard to enforce. But what we can do is maybe similar to like the maintenance of the landscaping provision, we can write in about maintenance of fresh coat of paint and things like that, where they don't let that deteriorate.
The color selection is so easy to mess up, even you put on a new one.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about that.
Somewhere along the lines we're talking about like kind of a community theme or unity. It would probably be too vague, as you said, to be enforceable, but if we can maybe put that in our initial purpose, try to create some continuity, like the street lights would be the same, the signage would be similar, and the paint color palettes would be, just sort of maybe in the purpose statement.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to, discourage creativity.
Right.
At the same time, we say something about the color selection, some complement to the adjacent property. So one building is not going to pop out like a fluorescent yellow, and then the next one is just really milk pink or something like that.
I think that would be a very objective or a subjective based off the applicant. Right?
Yeah. So keeping in mind what James has been saying about like the state law requiring us to be to provide objective standards, and I think it's because there's been too many of these, sort of examples coming up, where people are saying, well, is this color really neutral? Is it really, earth tone? We'll do some research and get back to you, but I have a feeling that beyond just like, even sort of that maintenance provision may be too subjective, but, because it'll say, maintain it in a good condition. But what we can do is say it has to be irrigated, for example. So that actually provides for a way for landscaping to be maintained. So we'll just kind of think about how we can make sort of the input that you've provided into either an objective standard or put it into the purpose statement or sort of the uniform, consistent look and feel of the community or something like that. So we'll think about it and get back to you.
Okay, so just looking at time, just want to be respectful of people's time here. I do have like two more comments. They're sign related. that we can get through, and then maybe at that point we can adjourn for another meeting. I think at that point, by the next meeting, I'd hope to have something that's a lot more cleaned up based off of the comments that we received, and then also we're doing some internal kind of preliminary review with some other staff, so it can get something that's a little bit more accurate, a little bit more formatted. So this is just related to signage, and it was mainly about just suggesting other types of signs, or even like if billboards are regulated as part of the CSD. And this is just kind of a general summary about how the sign section works. I think first off, the proposed sign language that's in the CSD draft here is a lot more stringent and effectively conservative, to the desires of the community than what's existing. So this is all, we're really ramping up sign regulation in Rowland Heights with the CSD regulation. So, but then what's allowed as far as signs go in the CSD isn't only just located in this. The CSD is on a hierarchy of other codes and standards, and so there's a really large and expansive sign standards at the Title 22 level, which the CSD is a chapter of, and those all apply. So I think I posted a link in this draft too. I can see if I can. Okay, it might be too much trouble here on with my computer right now to be able to copy that, but it's certainly in the draft that you'll receive today. But that'll show all of the other sign standards that are applicable. And in some cases, so some of those permitted, unpermitted signs, if there's signs that you think are unpermitted or what you think are not allowed per the current CSD, you can let our LA County Zoning Enforcement know, and they can go out and cite those signs. There's some grand openings, some allowances for grand opening signs or affiliation signs or things like that, but it's very controlled, and with this new CSD standards, it's very clear as to what's allowed and what's not. And I think in a way that the existing CSD standards in Rowland Heights, they're not as clear. So there's that. The other case is related to billboards. So billboards are not, let's see here. So outdoor advertising signage, like billboards, they're regulated in that section I just mentioned. They're in the larger Title 22. They're not located in the CSD. And that's applicable to Rowland Heights. So billboards need a conditional use permit, and they're only allowed in intensive commercial or industrial zones. We're talking the major commercial, so CNJ, industrial zones, major manufacturing. Those Rowland Heights along Colima, or really, in general in Rowland Heights, there's none of those zones. The only places in Rowland Heights that do have those zones are north of the SR60. And if there are billboards there, they would be subject to conditional use permits already. And if there's anything that's new, billboards that are proposed north in those industrial parcels, those would also be subject to CUPs. That's not being changed or adjusted as part of this CSD. That's sort of the existing standard. So no worries here. There's no billboards allowed by any means. In fact, the sign standards are much more stringent in this copy.
So we have questions from Debbie, and I don't know, Henri, do you have another question, or is this from the previous questions?
I think the signage, we do have grand opening signs that last almost forever. And we put something in that the grand opening sign should be probably maintained no longer than 1 year.
Yeah, and here it says such signs are, the proposed language is such signs are permitted only until 90 days after the initial occupancy of the new business and shall be removed no later than the 91st day. So it's very strict. We're talking 3 months for a grand opening sign. But if there's anything that's been open, or that has those signage longer, that's an enforcement issue, so you should definitely report that to enforcement.
Oh, okay, I see.
And Debbie has her hand up. I don't know if she's going to ask the question that she put in chat. So I'll hand it over to Debbie.
Yeah, hi. No, the chat one can stand alone. But I haven't driven on the 60 freeway for quite a while at night, but last night or 2 nights ago I did. And when we were driving by, say, Pearl of the East parking structure, it was lit up like a billboard. There was so much signage on every level of that parking structure that it was insane. I mean, it was actually distracting as I was driving because I'm like, oh my God. And I don't know when that occurred, and I don't know how it is allowed or not allowed, but just talking about billboards and then that kind of level of signage just seems, I don't know, insane. So is that regulated? How is that regulated? And then how do we address that? Because it literally was the entire wall of that multi-levels parking structure was nothing but lit up signs that were huge, and it was ridiculous. So, and then just to note, I'm sure Roy may weigh in, but there's also been, I guess, this influx of canvas signs or vinyl signs that are quite large that have been placed over the large commercial district signage stanchions, or whatever you want to call them, those monolith street signs where all the different stores are listed, and they're tearing, they're falling apart. So I think that also is an issue. And then generally speaking, I've lived in this community for over 25 years now, and I've heard nothing but we have signage rules, but there was this grandfather clause that, you know, they were given a certain amount of years to change out their signs, and I've yet to see anybody change out signs in the 20 plus years that I've been here. And I believe that grandfather period has long passed, and so I'm curious as to this new signage. And are we just creating another window for them to be able to just hold on to their signs with another grandfather period, or can we address the previous one and get those cleaned up before we start grandfathering people again for future ones? So I just feel like nothing's happened in the 20 plus years that I've been here regarding signage, like very little. I can't even imagine a sign that's improved in the time that I've been here. And I know that that was a big issue 20 plus years ago at RHCCC, and we were told we had to waive a certain number because the business had to like recoup the costs that they had put into the sign before changing it again. And I just honestly haven't seen anything improved there. So maybe there could be a little bit of discussion about that. I know we're short on time, but signage has been such a huge issue in this community. And I just feel like nothing has changed, and I don't foresee anything changing in the future. So
I know. Signs are such a. When I heard Pearl of the East, I said, oh, it's that Pearl of the East again. As far as the signs on the Pearl of the East, we'll refer to zoning enforcement. And so there's even like the county-wide sign programs, there's requirements, there's these really clear requirements about how many signage is allowed per business, per like building frontage and things like that. So we'll refer the signs on Pearl of the East to the zoning enforcement. And then as far as like maintenance of signs and how signs can be updated, it's just a really signs are a tricky issue because it's tied to First Amendment. That's one. I mean, we can deal with like the aesthetics of a sign, the standards, like how big it could be, how tall it can be, and things like that. But as far as like trying to remove existing signage and stuff, it just gets so caught up with First Amendment and other regulations that's when it becomes really difficult. For example, I'll give you an example of like billboards, right? It's not that these signs are, rise to the level of billboards, but it's sort of similar issue. Like there was one billboard company in like the West Hollywood area where like they would go in I've heard stories where they would go in the middle of the night to just put up these illegal billboards, but the city would have a hard time even suing whoever did that to bring that sign down, because once it's established, it was really hard to bring it down. So I'm just kind of pointing that out as a way to say that signs are a really complicated, tricky issue. But having said that, well, look, the reason that we've provided this sign section is we've actually paid really close attention, knowing about like the aesthetic issues and some of the ugly signs out there. We wanted to try to help improve signage in this area. So we took standards from like the only form-based code that the county had, which was written by a like architectural design firm to specifically address signs. And so it provides pictures, it provides specific dimensions. And so hopefully going forward, any new signs will conform to these standards, and it'll help improve, signs in the community. But like you said, when it comes to existing signs, I don't know if I have an answer for you about that, but we'll look into what we can do.
And just to add to that too, there's something called an amortization schedule. So that's what you're referring to, Debbie, is that at the time that an applicant needs to meet the standards of a code and they're non-conforming due to the standards of a new code that came out after that their thing was legally established, they have this amortization schedule. That means that that's kind of the grandfathering clause, but there's a hard date that's established in the code, year timeline. I think in the standard is 20 years in which they have to comply with the amortization schedule, and that schedule starts it starts when they establish that sign or that use. So if there's a new amortization schedule that's initiated by this CSD, that's not to say that those existing signs that are there that are already issues that have their own schedule would be grandfathered into this one. Would be really for new signage at that time. So this isn't necessarily another handout to those existing businesses. And if there's any of those like really deteriorating signage, that's definitely as I know it's definitely difficult to report sometimes because we're driving around or we're running errands, but definitely report those to zoning enforcement. That's really the only way that those can be addressed.
Well, I think Debbie also mentioned something about the brightness. I think the illumination of the sign, there's some safety issue too. Along the freeway on the City of Industry side, when they put out a new sign, they were extremely bright, and the driving alongside actually disturbed safe driving. So after a few years, I noticed industry actually toned down. I don't know whether they did it on their own or whether they've been requested by Caltrans to tone it down. So there was some signage on the freeway business to tone down this Pearl of the East. I don't know if we also do that, and because these new signs has to be controlled both in terms of lumen as well as color rendition. So both, if you have 5,000K LED signs, they will be giving you a headache just by looking at it. On the same lumen, if you take a 3,000K or 2,700K, it's much more easier on the eye. So I don't know with all of these new LED technologies, what can we do to control. I don't think we can just use the old standard and think it's gonna work by themselves, size and dimension. But even the new LED sign, if they are too bright, they actually affect the quality of the neighborhood.
Right. So with that, so one thing I'm able to confirm now is that the proposed language only allows for the I think there's no sign types in this that's allowed that would be that can be internally illuminated. So you can't have like a lighted box sign that faces out. But it doesn't necessarily answer your full question of like, can we control through a CSD, can the brightness of the outdoor illumination be regulated? I'm going to have to get back to you on that and talk with our current planning staff. I don't recall that ever being in a CSD before, so we'll have to see if that's something that because something to consider too is that a planner who's reading the plans would have to register on the application that the lighting that they're using on their site plan is below that amount, and it very well could be that the applicant by the time they reach the plan stage, the site plan stage, they may not even have that information or secured vendors for the lights yet. I get it, but that's not to say that it's not possible, but that it's but that we're gonna have to do some extra research there, definitely. But I think just to put everyone a little bit at ease, it's not to say that it's solving all of our sign problems, but that that if you take a look at what's in the CSD now and you take a look at the proposed language, I'm pretty confident that what's kind of being said right now in this form is at least somewhat, at the very least, moving in the right direction. I think that these are better standards and these are stricter, clearer standards than what's in the CSD now, and what's in the CSD now may be causing some of these issues by, if they're not as objective as they can be.
Linda has her hand up.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was just wondering, are we gonna do the same exercise like the CSD with the general plan? Because I haven't seen a draft general plan yet, and we've been just spending, I believe, like the last 3 meetings on the CSD.
Adrine, do you want to answer that? So let's go over on the plan.
So, we did talk at length about the Rowland Heights chapter, which we brought several times and collected comments on and revised and sent out. So, were you asking about the whole document, Linda?
Okay, so the plan that we're pretty much completed the general plan, and we could say that that's a document that's ready for community review and comments.
Yeah, so we have drafted all of the elements on our website, and I think we released them probably a couple of months ago, so everyone can review that, and we had kind of meetings going through those drafts. Oh gosh, my timeline is off, but probably April-ish, May. And then the specific Rowland Heights chapter is what we had brought to you before the CSD, and that's what we had a series of meetings on to go through line by line, collect comments, and then update it per your comments. So was there a specific section or something that you were curious about, Linda?
No, so can you just send me the latest draft to the general plan? I'd like to review it and just see if the comments...
For the whole plan for ESGVP, I can send you the link. There's all the elements online as well as all the community chapters, so I will send you the link.
I'm interested in the Rowland Heights.
Okay, so that's the latest draft, I think, is what we shared when we met last time, but I can resend it.
Okay, thank you.
Can you resend it to all the members?
Sure.
Adrine, at what point that the ELP is gonna present this update of the general plan to our community at large? Or are you expecting this committee to provide the update ourselves, or would the regional planning come out and actually be presenting all of this body of work in the last 12 months?
I think we had talked about that earlier, maybe before you joined, Henri. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think that so the part that going to RHCCC and providing a broad overview, I think that's one thing. But I think that what the community is asking for is they're asking for how the Rowland Heights existing Rowland Heights community plan is being updated. And so I think for that, we probably will need another meeting, so we can attend another meeting where we can present, okay, this is the existing Rowland Heights community meeting, and this is the updated draft that's being incorporated into the area plan. So it sounds like there's a lot of information we need to cover, and I want to keep those two issues separate.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think we need to know how we could reach out to our own community public to begin have a conversation on that. Because
Yes.
they are not aware of what we are doing here. and this is going to impact them for decades to come.
Yeah. So let's talk, maybe coordinate and talk about how we can get the word out, because we've tried getting the word out, right? We've held these we made drafts available in April. We've had online meetings. If you remember, we had series of online meetings, including, not only the community chapter on Rowland Heights, but others and other elements. And we had, in-person meetings, one of which was at, I believe it was at the, was it at the Steinmetz?
One at Steinmetz Park, and we've also tabled at gosh, I'm blanking on the Rowland Heights Park name, but we tabled twice with SD1 after the April meetings. I think they were in May or June. So we've been out in person trying to reach as many people as we can.
Yeah. Every time there's some type of an event, we've been out there with hard copies of the community, of Rowland Heights community chapter, as well as all of the other elements, to try to get the word out and to try to let people know. So, but we haven't been to RHCCC to talk about to give a briefing, so we can certainly do that. But as far as sort of like the general public, we've been to a series of meetings, the Rowland Heights meet and greet, the dog park opening, I forget the name of the dog park, the new dog park, the Shivarum. The Shivarum dog park, and each time we've taken, hard copies of the plan that's also available online to these events, and we've handed them out. So I know that because I've had to print more copies of the summaries and those sections. So they are in the hands of people, but we need to get out to RHCCC and give them a presentation and an update on what's going on. And again, one is like sort of generally about what we're doing with the area plan, as well as the completion of the mobility action plan, which, as you know, is being incorporated into the area plan as the mobility element, but also then too, I'm sure people are interested in how the existing community plan is being updated and being incorporated into the area-wide plan. Keeping in mind that because this is like it's an area-wide document that has the, as you know, like 9 topics that deal with things like mobility and land use and health and safety and public services, that to the extent that information is redundant, that has been pulled out of the community plan, and it now like resides or sits with the entire area, so that it applies to the area uniformly, but still, like I think as Adrine mentioned a few meetings ago, she went through the document and said these are the things that we are keeping and moving into the community chapter of the area plan. But you know what, we can certainly go through that presentation again with RHCCC for folks who feel like they don't have that information. All of this information is available online, and so perhaps what we can do is maybe if we could draft a email of what information is available at which link, we can send that to you and then get your help in getting that information out to the rest of the community, or to your contacts at least.
Yeah, I think as definitely a big part of this group is, us being able to work with a subset of the Rowland Heights community to get to standards that meet the needs of everyone. And with that, I think that involves like members of this group being able to in turn take this information that they've learned and share it with your neighbors. Really, I think it's a huge. There's a big responsibility in there in making sure that you're, as representatives of your community, that your neighbors are well informed too. So we're always happy to go out to community meetings, and there's folks that aren't able to even attend in-person community meetings or go out to these tabling events or join a virtual meeting. And for that, we're really trying to lean on this group to help us with that.
Mary has her hand up, and Debbie, is that do you have another question, or is that from previous?
Go ahead, Mary.
Just real quick, maybe I didn't read it in this document. I have recently seen, like, on the street that when I was driving out on Fairway, not Fairway, on Colima and Lake Canyon, there is like advertising of realtors saying, oh, this I'm only charging so much, not like an open house sign, but they've been sticking that sign at by the signal. Is advertising purpose. Is that allowed? I mean, you know.
So that would be there's definitely rules related to that, and especially if it's related to the right-of-way. As far as our department being able to regulate those advertising signage, like let's say it's like a real estate placard or something that's at an intersection, that would have to go through a public works inspector. If you have, if you have a photo of the sign and the location, and you can't get in touch with Public Works, we can certainly submit that on your behalf. But ultimately, our inspectors are not, they don't have a mechanism to regulate the public right of way, so those kind of signages would have to go through Public Works.
I see. I'm just thinking about the neat, like, how the neighborhood should be neatly and be more something to enforce on something like that. Otherwise, all the realtors can just stick the signs out there or just for the free advertising.
Right.
I'm a realtor too, and I don't think that is right to do something like that. It's
totally
the,
agree. Yeah.
the neatness of the community is very important. That's why I'm asking if there's any rules to regulate that. Is that something that we can put in? I know like some city, they saying, hey, if you're doing an open house, I can only allow you maximum of 7 signs, so you route yourself out, and then you can only put it there when the open house is done. Remove those signs. That's a courtesy, and is to follow so there's no sign everywhere in the neighborhood. So is that something that we can put into this? And
so because that's a right of way issue, especially if those signs are on private property, absolutely the CSD would apply, and there are conditions in here that would apply to signage like that. But it sounds like the signage that you're talking about, like those real estate signs or placards that are put up by like a real estate agent or a firm at an intersection or like near a street light or something. That can't be put into the CSD, and the reason for that is that because it's Title 22, this is like this code is part of the Title 22, and the authority only extends to private property and not the public right of way. It's not to say that's not a big issue. I agree with you that and I think that there are rules that prevent blocking of the public right of way, so you can't put signage on the sidewalk and stuff. That's can be readily enforced. I think now with current rules, it just can't be through our department because we don't control the public right of way.
I see. So what do you suggest for something like that?
We'll try to see if we can find a contact, and I'm pretty sure it's at the Public Works' Road and Maintenance section. So we'll see if we can find a contact at Public Works for you.
Okay. I'm more interested into something like some particular city like Arcadia. They have rules indicating like you can only have so many signs, you need to remove it, like after your open house, so it keeps the city clean. And, we would like that I would like to see that for the neighborhood that I live in.
Yeah, I'm sure we have similar provisions because it's visual clutter in the right of way, which
Yes.
is about safety issues, right? So, but what James is saying is if the county has these departments to regulate, what's in the right of way versus what's on private property, and the planning department deals with what's on private property. Public Works deals with what's in the right of way. So we'll get you a contact of Public Works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
And just want to make sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to make just note that to Debbie that I see I copied your comment from the chat into my notes. I don't think that relates to a redevelopment district. I think that's a cool idea. It doesn't necessarily fit into the objective standards of the CSD, but it's certainly something that could be recommended in the Rowland Heights community plan update. And I think that we could brainstorm more about how we could who the right people would be to get something like that together. It may not be completely planning related. It may be like be more coordinated. But so we're not necessarily the driver of that, but I think it's a cool idea, and we can elevate that for you.
So that's all the questions for now. I know you can always feel free to email us at any time, but we are definitely well over time. So if you have any further questions, feel free to email us. We're always available for email. And I will follow up with the links for the plan documents, so you're able to access all of that. But with that, I think I'll adjourn the meeting, and we will meet next month. And let's see, I think we'll follow up with what we're supposed to go over. Hopefully we'll have a significant ridgelines map by then, so we can talk about that more in depth. You can see the map. And then whatever other sort of issues that we need to kind of go through and settle as we proceed with like kind of finalizing and getting the drafts and final drafts ready. So thank you so much for coming today. As always, your comments are invaluable and your participation is invaluable. And please definitely try to reach out to your community, try to get people to participate, because we really, we depend on the feedback of all of you who know what's going on a day-to-day basis. So with that,
I'll echo that.
Have a great
I'll echo
day.
that. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Thank you. We'll see you next month.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
You
Nice
missed
to
my
see you all
comments,
too.
that's okay. Next month.